Victor, that's my mother. Isabella's words echoed through the crystal ballroom of the hotel, but my eyes were fixed on the woman who had just entered through the main door. It was her. The same homeless woman I had offered water and my jacket to just 2 hours earlier when I found her sitting on the sidewalk in front of the church. Now she was walking toward the altar with the bearing of a queen, wearing a Chanel dress that cost more than my car. My name is Victor, I am 32 years old, and I have just discovered that on my wedding day, without knowing it, I helped the richest woman in New York State. A woman whom my fiancée Isabella had described as dead to the family more than 10 years ago. The hall fell silent. 300 guests, all of them New York high society, watched in astonishment as Catherine Rothschild Martinez, the legendary heiress who had disappeared from the world after a family scandal, walked calmly down the aisle. Her net worth was estimated at $4 billion, and she hadn't appeared in public since 2012. "Impossible," whispered Isabella beside me, her face turning pale. "She's dead. My father said she died in a car accident in London." But I knew she wasn't dead. 2 hours earlier, when I left the church to get some fresh air and calm my pre-wedding nerves, I found her sitting on the steps of St. Patrick's Church. She was dressed in shabby clothes, shivering in the cold December wind. Her gray hair was unkempt, and she held a cardboard sign that read, "Any help is a blessing." Most people passed her by without even looking. Typical Manhattan, everyone too busy with their own lives to notice the suffering right in front of them. But something in her eyes made me stop. It wasn't despair I saw there. It was a keen intelligence, almost piercing, as if she were studying each person who passed by. "Excuse me, ma'am," I said, stopping in front of her. "Would you like some water? Or something to eat?" She looked up at me, deep blue eyes that I now recognized as identical to Isabella's. "Water would be wonderful, young man," she replied in a hoarse but polite voice. "I haven't eaten since yesterday." Without hesitation, I went into the nearest deli and bought water, a turkey sandwich, and some hot soup. When I returned, I took off my Hugo Boss jacket, a wedding gift from Isabella's parents, and placed it over her shivering shoulders. "Thank you," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "Your kindness will be remembered." At that moment, something strange happened. She touched my hand as I handed her the food and whispered, "A person's true character is revealed when no one is watching. You are a good man, Victor." I was surprised. I didn't remember telling her my name. Now, watching her walk down the aisle at my wedding, I realized that I had been tested. And apparently, I had passed. If you're enjoying this story of how a simple act of kindness completely changed my wedding, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how this revelation transformed everything. Isabella grabbed my arm tightly. "Victor, you don't understand. If she's alive, that means my father lied about everything. About the inheritance, about the business, about who really controls the family empire." Her voice was heavy with panic. "She can ruin our entire life." But as my bride panicked beside me, I just watched the woman I had helped walk down the aisle. Because now I understood that this wedding wasn't what I thought it would be. And I wasn't who Isabella thought I was either. Catherine continued down the aisle, ignoring the shocked whispers of the 300 guests who filled the crystal ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. Each step she took echoed like a judge's gavel, sealing the fate of a family that had built its fortune on lies. Isabella stood beside me, trembling. "Victor, we need to get out of here. Now." Her voice had a desperate urgency I'd never heard before. "You don't understand what she's capable of." But I understood perfectly. Over the past 6 months, since Isabella had accepted my marriage proposal, I had begun to notice strange inconsistencies in her family's history. Small details that didn't add up. Like how Isabella always changed the subject when I asked her about her mother. Like how her father, Ricardo Martinez, avoided talking about the tragic accident that had supposedly killed Catherine in London. "She died in 2012, Isabella had told me repeatedly. "Car accident. Very traumatic for the family. Please don't mention it in front of my father." But the woman walking down the aisle was very much alive. And from the way everyone in the room watched her, some with reverence, others with absolute fear, it was clear that Catherine Rothschild Martinez was a legend everyone knew about except me. "Ladies and gentlemen," Catherine's voice echoed through the hall without the need for a microphone. Her presence commanded natural attention. "I apologize for interrupting this celebration, but I need to speak with my son-in-law." Son-in-law. The word hit the guests like a bomb. Isabella grabbed my arm so hard it left marks. "Victor, she's going to ruin our life," she whispered desperately. "My father built everything after she left. The business, our social standing, everything. If she comes back." It was then that I realized the devastating truth. Isabella wasn't just nervous about meeting an unexpected mother-in-law. She was terrified because her family's entire wealth, the mansion in the Hamptons, the luxury cars, the Princeton education she paid for, this extravagant wedding at the plaza, had been built on a lie. Catherine stopped about 10 feet away from us. Up close, I could see that beneath the elegant clothes she now wore, there were still traces of the vulnerable woman I had found on the sidewalk. But there was something else, a sharp intelligence that cut like a razor. "Isabella, my dear," Catherine said, her voice laden with icy irony. "You've grown so much since they forced me to leave. 15 years is a long time. 15 years. Not 10, as Isabella had always said." Another lie. "Mother," Isabella managed to say, her voice barely audible. We thought you were dead." Catherine smiled, but there was no warmth in that smile. Yes, I imagine Richard spread that version. Much more convenient for him to take control of the inheritance that was rightfully mine. Much easier to justify to you why Mommy never visited or called. The room was completely silent. All 300 guests, the cream of New York society, watched this family drama unfold like a live reality show. "But you, Victor," Catherine turned to me, and her blue eyes sparkled with genuine approval. "You offered me water when I was thirsty. Food when I was hungry. Your coat when I was cold. Without knowing who I was, without expecting anything in return." Isabella looked at me with growing horror. You knew her before? When?" 2 hours ago," I replied, my voice strangely calm. "She was sitting in front of the church. I thought she was a homeless woman in need of help." "In need of help," Catherine repeated, savoring the words. "Interesting how perspective changes everything, isn't it? For 15 years, Ricardo told me that the family was better off without me. That I was unstable, dangerous, a disgrace to the Martinez name." She opened a small purse she was carrying and took out an official document. Imagine my surprise when I discovered, through private investigators, that my own daughter was getting married using money that was stolen from me. The document fluttered in Isabella's hands as she read it. It was a court order, stamped with the seal of the New York court. "A freeze order," Catherine explained calmly. "Effective immediately. All accounts, property, and investments under the Martinez name are frozen pending a full investigation into misappropriation of inheritance." Isabella collapsed. Literally. Her legs gave way and she clung to my shirt, her eyes filled with tears of panic. "Victor, please. You have to help me. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about any of this." But she did know. I saw it in her eyes. Maybe not the legal details, but she always knew there was something wrong with the story about her dead mother. And she chose to believe the version that gave her access to wealth. "Where is your father now?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. He couldn't come to the wedding," Isabella stammered. "Urgent business trip to the Cayman Islands." Catherine laughed, a humorless sound. "How convenient. The Cayman Islands, where he transferred $2 million from my trust account last week. My lawyers are already there, of course." The entire ballroom was watching our destruction in real time. Whispers grew like waves. Cell phones appeared, recording every second of this scandal that would be headline news all over New York by tomorrow. But all I could think about was the woman shivering from the cold I had met 2 hours earlier. A billionaire who had been forced to live on the streets to escape a family that had betrayed and stolen from her. And the woman I thought I loved, who had lied to me about everything. Catherine looked at me with those piercing eyes. "Victor, you have a choice to make. You can stay with my daughter and go down with this charade, or you can join me in righting 15 years of wrong." I looked at Isabella, who was still clinging to my shirt like a lost child. Then I looked at Catherine, the woman who had tested my character 2 hours earlier without my knowing it. The choice was obvious. But what neither of them knew was that I had kept something from our conversation on the sidewalk. Something that would completely change the course of this story. The tension in the hall was palpable. 300 guests from New York's elite watched in absolute silence as one of the city's most powerful families disintegrated before their eyes. Cell phones recorded discreetly, knowing they were witnessing what would be the scandal of the year. Catherine watched my thoughtful expression and smiled. You're processing everything, aren't you, Victor? Discovering how many lies Isabella and Ricardo told during their 2 years together. Isabella was still clinging to my arm, her fingers trembling. Victor, please. I can explain everything. My father said it was for our protection. That she had become unstable after my grandfather's death, and that. Unstable. Catherine laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Interesting how that word appears in every version of the story Ricardo has concocted. She opened her purse again and pulled out a second document. Victor, did you know that your fiancée has a $15 million trust fund that was supposed to be transferred to me when she turned 25? Isabella paled even more. I didn't know. Catherine finished for her. Or didn't want to know. Because these documents show your signature authorizing the transfer of these funds to an account in the Cayman Islands. Your signature, Isabella. Dated 6 months ago. The entire room whispered. Some guests were already discreetly rising, realizing that being associated with this family could tarnish their own reputations. In New York high society, financial scandals were socially contagious. 6 months ago, I repeated, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. That's when you suggested I sign the prenuptial agreement. When you said it was to protect us both. Isabella looked at me with pleading eyes. Victor, you have to understand. My father said it was temporary. That he was reorganizing the family's investments to steal $15 million from my inheritance, Catherine interrupted coldly. And use you as his legal accomplice, since technically the money was in your name. It was then that Margaret Ashford, one of the most respected matriarchs of New York society, rose from her table. She had known Catherine since she was a young girl, and her voice echoed through the hall. Catherine Rothschild Martinez, you disappeared for 15 years. Where have you been all this time? Catherine turned to her family friend with dignity. Living on the streets, Margaret. Literally. After Ricardo forged medical documents declaring me mentally incompetent, he froze all my accounts and had me forcibly committed to a private psychiatric clinic. I escaped and spent years living from city to city, trying to survive. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret Ashford covered her mouth with her hand in horror. 15 years, Catherine continued, her voice growing stronger. 15 years sleeping in shelters, depending on the kindness of strangers. 15 years being treated as invisible by the society that once welcomed me. And you know what I learned, Margaret? I learned to recognize the true character of people. She looked directly at me. And your future son-in-law has shown more genuine compassion in 5 minutes on the church steps than my own daughter has shown in a lifetime. Isabella was crying now, tears spraying the silk of her $20,000 wedding dress. Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know you were suffering. Dad said you had rejected us, that you had chosen a different life. Chosen? Catherine's voice rose an octave. You think I chose to be drugged with sedatives until I couldn't think clearly? That I chose to have my own daughter sign papers declaring me dead? It was at that moment that I realized something no one else had noticed. During our conversation on the church sidewalk, when Catherine touched my hand and said I was a good man, she had slipped something discreetly into my jacket pocket. Something I had only found when I was changing for the wedding. A small card with a phone number and a message. If something unexpected happens today, call this number. A friend. At the time, I thought it was just a card for some social service or shelter. I put it in my inside pocket without thinking much of it. But now, Catherine, I said, my voice cutting through the drama. You knew I was going to marry Isabella when we met on the sidewalk. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. She studied me with those piercing blue eyes. You're more perceptive than I thought, Victor. Yes, I knew. I've been watching my daughter's life from a distance for years. Private investigators, social news, public records. When I heard she was getting married, I decided it was time to come back. So it was all planned, Isabella whispered, the realization crossing her face. The meeting on the street, being here today. Not all of it, Catherine corrected. I was really hungry and cold this morning. I really needed help. What wasn't planned was your fiancée's genuine kindness. That was an impromptu test he passed with flying colors. Margaret Ashford approached, her expression a mixture of shock and curiosity. Catherine, you said you have investigators. What evidence do you have about all this? Catherine smiled, and this time there was real satisfaction in that smile. Margaret, dear, I have 5 years of meticulous documentation. Bank transfers, forged documents, bribed doctors, embezzlement. Ricardo Martinez built a financial empire using my money, my identity, and my reputation. She paused, letting the words sink in. And the most interesting part? He documented everything. Apparently, he believed I was truly dead and that there would never be any consequences. Arrogant men often become careless. Isabella was shaking her head frantically. No, no, no. This can't be happening. Victor, we can get out of here. We can go to Europe, start a new life. With what money? I asked calmly. From what I understand, your family's entire fortune was stolen, and you participated in the theft. I didn't know, she cried, her voice echoing through the hall. I swear I didn't know everything. But I saw the truth in her eyes. She might not have known all the legal details, but she knew there was something deeply wrong with the story of her dead mother. And she chose not to question it because ignorance was more comfortable than the truth. Catherine approached me, completely ignoring her crying daughter. Victor, you mentioned you kept something from our conversation. What was it? I reached into my pocket where I had kept the card. But there was something else. During our conversation on the sidewalk, when she commented on my kindness, I had taken a picture of her with my cell phone. Not to post on social media or anything like that. But because something about her dignity, even dressed in rags, touched me deeply. I took a photo, I admitted. And you gave me a card. Catherine nodded approvingly. Keep that photo, Victor. It could be important as evidence that our meeting was genuine, not staged. And the card, well, the number connects directly to my lawyer. In case you decide that the truth is worth more than a comfortable lie. Isabella grabbed my face with her hands. Victor, please. I love you. We can get through this. We can rebuild our lives together. I looked into the eyes of the woman I thought I knew. Eyes that had cried fake tears over her mother's tragic death. Eyes that had convinced me to sign documents I didn't fully understand. Eyes that now looked at me with desperation, not for lost love, but for lost financial security. Isabella, I said softly, removing her hands from my face. You spent 2 years telling me that her mother was dead. That she had died in a traumatic car accident. You made me feel guilty for asking questions about her. My voice grew firmer. But she was alive. Suffering on the streets while you spent her stolen money on designer dresses and expensive dinners. And you knew it. I didn't know, she repeated, but her voice sounded hollow now. Maybe you didn't know all the details, I conceded. But you knew something was wrong. And you chose not to investigate because the truth would have been inconvenient. Catherine watched our interaction with clinical interest. Victor, you have an important choice to make. You can walk out of here with Isabella and try to build a life based on stolen money and lies. Or you can join me in righting 15 years of injustice. I looked around the room. The 300 guests watched us as if we were a live reality show. Isabella was devastated, her tears smearing her expensive makeup. Catherine was calm, dignified, waiting patiently for my answer. But there was something neither of them knew. Something I had discovered on the card Catherine had slipped into my pocket. Something that would completely change the course of this story. Before I decide, I said, pulling the card from my pocket, I need to ask you a question, Catherine. She nodded, intrigued. Why is the number on this card registered under the name Victor Sterling? The silence that followed was absolute. Catherine blinked once, twice, as if processing impossible information. That's impossible, Isabella whispered, staring at the card in my hand. But Catherine began to smile. A slow, astonished smile, as if an impossible puzzle were finally coming together. Sterling, she repeated slowly. Victor Sterling. How old are you, Victor? 32, I replied automatically. And where were you born? Mount Sinai Hospital. On December 9, 1991. Catherine covered her mouth with her hand, tears beginning to stream down her cheeks. My God, Margaret Ashford whispered, understanding before any of us did. Catherine, you didn't just have one daughter, did you? Catherine shook her head slowly, her eyes fixed on me. Ricardo didn't just steal my money and my identity. He stole both of my children. The entire hall fell silent as the most impossible truth was revealed. I wasn't just Isabella's fiancé. I was the twin brother she never knew existed. The silence in the hall was absolute. 300 guests from New York's elite processed the impossibility of what they had just heard. Victor Sterling, Isabella Martinez's twin brother. Separated at birth by a father who had built his empire on lies and manipulation. This is impossible, Isabella whispered, her words breaking the silence like shattering glass. Victor, you can't be my brother. We were about to get married. Catherine pulled an envelope from her purse, her hands shaking slightly. Ricardo told me that one of the twins had died at birth. That you, Isabella, were the only survivor. He forged the death certificate, paid bribes at the hospital, and gave me sedatives so strong that I couldn't question anything. She looked directly at me. Victor was given up for adoption through a private agency that Ricardo controlled. Probably sold to a family that paid well for a baby with no complicated medical history. My mind was in total panic. Childhood memories began to make disturbing sense. Why did my adoptive parents never talk about my biological origins? Why had I always felt that something was missing in my life? Why, when I met Isabella 2 years ago, did I feel an instant connection that I mistook for romantic love? The Sterlings, I murmured, the pieces falling into place. My adoptive parents. They died in a car accident when I was 18. I was never told who my biological parents were. Catherine nodded sadly. They were probably given specific instructions by Ricardo never to reveal the truth. Men like him don't leave loose ends. Isabella was shaking her head frantically. No, no, no. This can't be happening. Victor, you have to remember something. Something from your childhood, some sign. But I remembered. Strange dreams since childhood about a dark-haired girl who played with me in a garden I had never seen before. Recurring nightmares about being separated from someone important. The constant feeling that half of me was missing. You always said you felt connected to me from the moment we met, Isabella continued, her voice desperate. You said it was like we'd known each other for years. Because you did, Catherine said softly. You spent the first 9 months of your lives together. The twin connection never completely disappears, it just manifests itself in ways we don't understand. Margaret Ashford approached, her expression a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. Catherine, are you absolutely sure? The implications are. I have the DNA results, Catherine interrupted, pulling official documents from the envelope. I collected hair samples from Victor's apartment 3 weeks ago, when I learned about the wedding. The tests confirm it, 99.9% probability of fraternal kinship. The entire room whispered. Some guests were already getting up, realizing that being present at this scandal could tarnish their own reputations. Others remained, mesmerized by the Shakespearean scale of the drama. 3 weeks ago, I repeated, my voice sounding distant. You've known for 3 weeks, and you didn't say anything. I needed more evidence, Catherine explained. And I needed to be sure what kind of man you were. If you had Ricardo's character, you would have allowed the marriage to go ahead and used this information to blackmail the family later. She looked at me with maternal approval. But you proved today, on the church steps, that you possess genuine compassion. That you are capable of selfless kindness. That gave me hope that when you knew the truth, you would make the right choice. Isabella grabbed my arm again. Victor, please. We can get through this. We can move away, start a new life. As brother and sister. I asked, my voice cutting. Isabella, we almost committed incest. Do you understand the gravity of what your father did? I didn't know, she cried. How could I have known? Because, Catherine said coldly, you always knew there were secrets in this family. You always knew there was something wrong with the story of my death. And you chose not to investigate because ignorance was more comfortable. If you're following this devastating revelation and want to find out how this family will deal with decades of lies, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the outcome of this unbelievable story. Margaret Ashford approached Catherine. My dear, what are your intentions now? Legally, you are entitled to everything. Catherine smiled, but there was no warmth in that smile. My intentions, Margaret, are simple. I want back everything that was stolen from me. Every dollar, every property, every investment. And I want Ricardo to face the legal consequences of fraud, document forgery, and child abduction. Abduction. Isabella gasped. Intentionally separating twins, falsifying death certificates, selling a child for illegal adoption, Catherine listed. Those are federal crimes, Isabella. Your father didn't just steal my money. He stole my children. I looked at Catherine, then at Isabella, trying to process the new reality. My fiancée was my sister. My mother-in-law was my biological mother. And the man I had never met was responsible for destroying my family before I even knew she existed. Catherine, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. Where is Ricardo now? She smiled, and this time there was genuine satisfaction in her expression. In the Cayman Islands, trying to transfer the last $2 million from my trust account to an offshore bank. Unfortunately for him, my lawyers have already issued international freeze orders. He's stuck there until the American authorities process his extradition. Extradition. Isabella whispered. His crimes were committed on American soil, Isabella. He will have to answer for them in American courts. And with the evidence I've gathered over the past 5 years, he's looking at a minimum of 20 years in prison. Isabella collapsed into a nearby chair, the weight of reality finally hitting her. Her entire life, her identity, her wealth, even her engagement, had been built on lies. Victor, Catherine turned to me, her blue eyes, so much like mine, glittering with cautious hope. You have a choice to make. You can try to keep up this charade and protect Isabella from the consequences, or you can join me in righting 32 years of wrongdoing. I looked around the room. The guests watched us as if we were a spectacle. Isabella was devastated, crying silently. Catherine stood tall, dignified, waiting for my response. But there was something neither of them knew. Something I had discovered in Isabella's apartment 3 weeks ago. Something that would completely change the course of this confrontation. Before I decide, I said, taking my cell phone out of my pocket, there's something you both need to see. Catherine raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Isabella, I continued, my voice growing stronger, do you want to know how I really found out about the Cayman Islands money? Isabella looked up, confused. Because I saw the transfer documents on your laptop. 3 weeks ago. You didn't just know about the theft, Isabella. You were actively helping to hide the money. The silence that followed was absolute. And I have photos of everything. The silence in the hall became deafening. 300 guests from New York's elite watched as I held my cell phone, the screen displaying the first of several photos that would change everything. 3 weeks ago, I began, my voice echoing through the crystal ballroom. Isabella asked to use my laptop while mine was being repaired. She said she needed to check some work emails. Isabella was as pale as the silk of her wedding dress. Victor, you don't understand the context. Let me show you the context, I interrupted, zooming in on the first photo on the screen. This is a screenshot of your email conversation with your father, dated October 23rd. 3 days before he left for the Cayman Islands. Catherine moved closer, her eyes shining with renewed interest. What did she say? I cleared my throat and read directly from the screenshot. Dad, I transferred another $500,000 to the Swiss offshore account as you requested. Victor doesn't suspect a thing. He signed all the prenuptial documents without reading them. After the wedding, it will be impossible to trace anything back to us. The collective whisper of the guests was like a breaking wave. Margaret Ashford covered her mouth in horror. Isabella grabbed my arm. Victor, you took that out of context. I was just. Just what? I asked, moving on to the next photo. Because here's a reply to your father's email asking if I found out about the Zurich account. He doesn't suspect a thing. He's so naive. He believes everything I tell him about Mom being dead. Keep transferring. Once we're married, he can't testify against me due to spousal privilege. The reaction in the room was instant and devastating. Whispered conversations erupted among the guests. Some people were already getting up, realizing that being associated with this scandal could ruin their own reputations. Catherine held my hand, her eyes filled with tears. Victor, you knew 3 weeks ago that this was a trap? Not just a trap, I replied, showing her more photos. A complete scheme of embezzlement and technical bigamy. Isabella knew who I was from our first meeting. Isabella tried to rush toward the exit, but Margaret Ashford, with all her authority as a social matriarch, blocked her way. Young lady, you will stay here until you explain everything. There's more, I continued, enlarging a photo of an official document. This is a private investigation report that Isabella commissioned on me 6 months before we accidentally met at that cafe in Soho. She knew my full name, my adoption history, even my address. Catherine read over my shoulder, her voice growing colder by the second. She was instructed to get close to you to ensure you signed documents that would give her legal access to my inheritance through marriage. And it worked, I admitted bitterly. For 2 years, I believed I had found my soul mate. The instant connection I felt was real, the connection of twins separated. But she knew the whole time. Isabella was crying uncontrollably now. Victor, I fell in love with you, I did. Yes, it started as a plan, but then... Then what? I asked, showing her the last photo. Because this email is from just a week ago. Dad, speed up the transfers. Victor is asking a lot of questions about our family. I need to marry him before he finds out the truth. The entire room fell silent. Then Catherine opened her purse and took out a different phone. Victor, there's something I haven't told you about my activities over the last 5 years. She dialed a number and put it on speakerphone. Agent Morrison? This is Catherine Martinez. Activate Justice Protocol. We have Isabella Martinez at the Plaza Hotel, Crystal Room. She just confessed to participating in international bank fraud. The line went silent for a moment. Confirmed, Ms. Martinez. Federal team is 5 minutes away. Keep everyone in the hall. Isabella collapsed completely. Agent Morrison? Justice Protocol? What's going on? Catherine smiled, but there was no warmth in that smile. Isabella, dear, did you think I spent 15 years on the streets just surviving? For the past 5 years, I've been working as a federal informant, helping to dismantle financial fraud rings. The revelation hit the room like a bolt of lightning. Margaret Ashford sat down heavily, processing the information. Your father isn't just an individual fraudster, Catherine continued. He's part of an international network that uses arranged marriages and document forgery to launder money through rigged inheritances. You two were the last link we needed to close the case. Isabella looked at me in utter despair. Victor, did you know? Were you working with her? No, I replied honestly. Until this morning, when I ran into Catherine on the street, I had no idea. But when I saw the photos on her laptop, I started digging. And when I found out that my biological mother was alive. You came to me, Catherine finished. The number on the card I gave you connected directly to my federal contact. You called last night. And I found out that my fiancé and father-in-law were being investigated for federal crimes, I added, and that I was both a victim and evidence in the case. At that moment, the doors to the hall opened and 6 federal agents entered, their badges flashing. The lead agent addressed Isabella directly. Isabella Martinez, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit bank fraud, falsification of federal documents, and international money laundering. As they read her rights, Isabella looked at me one last time. Victor, please. There has to be something we can do. I looked at the woman I thought I loved, who had lied to me about everything for 2 whole years. Isabella, the only thing you can do now is tell me the truth about one thing. She nodded desperately. In those moments when we were alone, when you said you loved me, was any of that real? Isabella looked into my eyes, tears streaming down her face. She opened her mouth to respond, but couldn't form the words. Her broken expression gave me the answer. As the agents led her away, Catherine grabbed my arm. Victor, I know this is devastating, but you saved many other families by exposing this network. I looked around the hall, where 300 guests from New York's elite were trying to process the drama they had just witnessed. Some looked shocked, others intrigued, some clearly relieved that they weren't involved. Catherine, I said, finally allowing myself to call my biological mother by her first name. What happens now? She smiled, and this time there was genuine hope in that smile. Now my son, we're going home. We have 32 years of catching up to do. But as we left the Plaza Hotel together, I knew that this wasn't just the end of a charade. It was the beginning of a lifetime of truth. And Isabella? Well, she would soon discover that federal prison is very different from the gilded prison of New York high society. Some lessons are learned the hard way. 6 months later, I was sitting in the office of Sterling and Associates, my new financial security consulting firm. The irony of the name didn't escape me. I was finally using my real last name. Catherine walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee and a folded newspaper. "The trial results are in," she said, placing the New York Times on my desk. The headline was devastating: "Elite heiress sentenced to 15 years for international fraud." The photo of Isabella being escorted away in handcuffs took up half the front page. "Ricardo got 25 years, Catherine continued, sitting down in the armchair across from my desk. "The money laundering ring we uncovered through him dismantled operations in 12 countries. The FBI estimates we saved over $200 million in stolen inheritance." I looked out the 32nd floor window, watching Manhattan spread out below us. 6 months ago, I was about to marry my own twin sister, unaware that my entire life was based on lies. Today, I was building something real. "Any regrets?" Catherine asked, following my gaze. "About exposing Isabella?" "No." My answer came without hesitation. She had multiple opportunities to tell me the truth. When she found out who I really was, when she learned about Ricardo being investigated, when she saw that I had found the documents. At every turn, she chose to lie. Catherine nodded understandingly. Over the past 6 months, we had spent hours talking, rebuilding a mother-daughter relationship that had been stolen from us. I discovered that she wasn't just a victim. She was an incredibly resilient woman who had turned her survival on the streets into a mission to protect other families. "Your grandfather's will has finally been validated," she said, handing me a legal envelope. "You are now officially the heir to 50% of the Rothschild-Martinez estate. Isabella lost all rights when she was convicted." I opened the envelope and looked at the numbers. More money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. But it wasn't about the money, it never was. "What about the Sterlings? My adoptive parents?" I asked. "They were victims too," Catherine replied sadly. "Ricardo convinced them that you were the son of a drug-addicted mother who had died. They believed they were saving an abandoned child. When they discovered the truth through the investigation, they were devastated." I picked up the framed photo on my desk, Tom and Sandra Sterling on my graduation day. They had loved me genuinely, even though they had been deceived about my origins. "They apologized to me," I continued. "They said they always knew something was strange about the documents, but they believed the lawyers when they said everything was legal." My phone rang. It was Agent Morrison. "Victor, we have news on the Cayman case. We recovered another $3 million from an account Ricardo hid in the name of one of his relatives. The money will be returned to the family foundation." "Thank you, Agent Morrison." I hung up and looked at Catherine. In 6 months, she had gone from a homeless woman I found on the sidewalk to the matriarch of one of New York's most powerful families. But more importantly, she had become my mother. "You know what's weird about all this?" I asked. During my 2 years with Isabella, I always felt like something was missing. Like there was a connection I couldn't quite define. I thought it was love. "It was love," Catherine corrected. "Sibling love. The connection between twins that even Ricardo couldn't completely erase." I took out the photo I had taken of her on the sidewalk outside the church, the photo that had become crucial evidence in the federal case. A woman in ragged clothes, but with unshakable dignity in her eyes. "Why did you risk everything by showing up at my wedding?" I asked. "You could have contacted me privately." Catherine smiled. "Because Isabella needed to see the consequences of her choices publicly. And because you deserved to know the truth in front of everyone who mattered. Some revelations are too powerful to happen in the shadows." Last week, I visited Isabella in federal prison. Not for forgiveness or reconciliation, but for closure. She was different, smaller, more fragile, as if reality had finally broken through the facade of confidence she wore as armor. "Victor," she said through the thick glass, "if I could go back in time, would you have told the truth on the first day?" I asked. She lowered her eyes. "I don't know." That honesty, finally, was more valuable than any apology. Today, I got up from the table and walked over to the window. Down on the sidewalk where it all began, there was a small plaque that Catherine had put up, in memory of all those who were invisible until someone chose to see them. I learned something important that day at church, I told Catherine. Kindness isn't about being rewarded. It's about doing what's right when no one is watching. And you found out that someone is always watching, she replied. If this story of how a simple choice to show compassion revealed decades of lies and transformed an entire family has touched you, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories of courage, truth, and justice that prove that doing the right thing is always worth it. Today, when I pass people in need on the streets of New York, I always stop. Not because they might be billionaires in disguise, but because they might be human beings in need of humanity. Sometimes life's greatest gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected disguises. And sometimes saving a stranger is the only way to save yourself.